So the last piece that I want to do in the Rambam, in Maimonides, sort of in this overview of what he means by the soul and what does he really hold about resurrection. And then we'll go to his letter on resurrection and, sort of judge, is it is it apologetic or not? So far, we have not really seen much about bodily resurrection. Even in his commentary to 10th chapter of Sanhedrin, which we saw in English, the first thing that we did, which was the end of that book we were doing, where he talks about the 13 principles of belief, he really he seemed to also sort of skirt it a little bit. So this is the Guide to the Perplexed, and it's divided into 3 different sections. The Guide to the Perplexed. This is, of course, his one of his most famous books, his book of Jewish philosophy. And the first book is very much about how people use language to misunderstand things. For instance, he begins with a whole explanation of what the Torah means by the image of God. In other words, you might make a mistake of thinking that because the human being is made in the image of God, that God has an image. So he deals with that because obviously the Rambam, God cannot have an image. Here he deals with the word soul. So he says, maybe we'll just do it in English. I think that'll be better. He says the Hebrew word soul, it was written in Arabic. The guide was written in Arabic and translated during his life into Hebrew. The Mishnah Torah, his book of Jewish law, was written in Hebrew. It says the Hebrew nefesh, soul, is a harmonious noun, as it's homonym, signifying it can mean a lot of different things, the word soul, just like it can in English. The vitality, which is common to all living and sentient beings, whereas there's a living soul. It also denotes blood, as it says in the Torah, right? Hadam hu hanefesh. You can't eat the blood of an animal, the blood is the soul. So we use soul in lots of different ways. Another signification of the term is reason. That is the distinguishing character of the human being. God gave the human being a living soul. The Rambam holds that when God made the human being in the image of the divine, it means God gave the human being intellect. So you might think the soul means intellect. So what does it mean? Does it mean blood? Does it mean sentience? Does it mean intellect? Right, the word soul gets used in lots of different ways. And then he says it denotes also the part of the human being that remains after his death. Right, that of course is significant for us. And the proof that he brings for that it's the of Hushem Hadavar Nishar min Adam Achar Mavet. It is the name for the part of the human being which remains after death, as it says, V'hayita nefesh Adonit Surah B'tzorachayim. Remember, he had quoted this verse actually in the Mishnah Torah, in the Foundations of Belief, where he was talking about the soul. The soul of my master is bound in the bonds of life. And so you see that even after death, there is a soul, from Jeremiah, from Samuel. Lastly, it denotes will, that the human being has will. Where do we see that? That Hushem Haratzon, desire, will, les or shario benafsho. Kloma biritzono. No, it's the word to desire something in your soul means in your will. Okay. And so he's saying the word soul gets used in lots of different ways. And we can explain the verse, and his will, nefesh, to trouble Israel, ceased. To Jonathan, son of Aziel, same thing, that the soul means different things. For the passage which proceeds, stated the providence abandoned the Israelites, left them on the brink of death. They cried and prayed for help. Whenever they repented, God showed mercy to them. So he's basically just explaining that the word soul can mean a lot of different things. One thing it can mean is that which remains after death. can do one more chapter. He says the word chai, living, signifies a sentient organism. And death, mavet, shem hamita, shem acholi achazak, can mean death or can mean very bad illness, the word death. And some of the Andalusian authors say here he probably means Jewish authors. There was a whole school of Torah study in Andalusia, southern Spain. Say that his breath was suspended, so no breathing could be perceived at all. Let's see the end of this. So the word chai can mean also the gathering of wisdom, as it says, there'll be life to your soul. The Torah is a life to those who find it. So the word life can mean also a lot of different things. Okay. So let's go to the treatise on resurrection now. I just do want to look back to, because in the first text that we did, which was the book from Amazon, which had in it the introduction to the 10th chapter of Sanhedrin. There I want to go back to it now, because now that we've seen a bunch of different sources, there he sort of lays out the parts of this of the soul. Let's see. This was the 5th chapter in before he goes through, remember he has an introduction to his belief system, and then he goes through the 13 principles of belief. But just before he goes through all the 13 principles, at the end of this introduction, let me show this with you. Right, he divided it up into all these different, what happens after you die, right? That people have all these different images. There's this concept called the Garden of Eden. Now, he thinks that's a place in the world. We saw this before. Gehinnom, right? Hell, suffering that will befall the wicked. The nature of the suffering is not clarified in the Talmud. One authority says they'll be burned. The resurrection of the dead is one of the cardinal doctrines of the Torah of Moses. One who does not believe in this has no religion and no bond of the Jewish faith. So here he says you have to believe in the resurrection of the dead. Now, what does he mean by that? This reward will only be for the righteous, shown in the statement in Bereshit Rabbah, the great benefits of rain are both for the righteous and the wicked, but the resurrection of the dead is only for the righteous. Indeed, how will the evildoers live after death, seeing they were already dead in their life? As the sages taught, the wicked are called dead even in their lives, the righteous are called living even after their death. Right? It's sort of metaphoric here. And know that man must die and become dissolved into his component parts. So there he seems to hedge, right? Is he talking about the resurrection of the dead? What does it mean? Does it mean the bodily resurrection of the dead? It seems unclear, right? He goes out of his way to say that the body dissolves. The days of the Messiah will be when sovereignty will return to the Jewish people. We saw it in his book of Jewish law that he doesn't believe that the time of the Messiah is a supernatural thing. And he says that here. It's just that it'll be a time when there's peace and we'll have what we need in order to study the Torah and to perfect our deeds. There'll be no changes in reality for how things are now, except sovereignty will return to Israel. I've said that many times. This indicates there'll be planting and harvest there in the land of Israel at the time of the Messiah. Great benefits that will accrue to us in that time. He goes out of his way to talk about it as a very physical time and as a time that's not miraculous. The prophets and the pious desired the Messianic era because it's a time to gather together the righteous, and there'll be justice, and there'll be the ability to study. Okay, then about the world to come, is under conditions like these, one obtains a firm hold on the world to come. In other words, because you're going to have, during the time of the Messiah, it'll be easy to study. Final goal is attaining the world to come. Olam haba, right? He doesn't say it's the resurrection of the dead at the time of the Messiah, so it's the world to come. It is to that effort that one must be directed. Therefore, the sages looked toward the final goal and put aside what was extraneous to it and said all of Israel have a portion in the world to come. Though the world to come constitutes the desired goal, it is not fitting for one who wishes to serve God from love to serve God for that, right? You have to do it not for reward, even though there is reward. It's fitting as a person of well-balanced temperament to perform meritorious deeds and shun transgressions just for their own sake. One arrives at this degree of perfection, though, when you do it all. It's the nature of perfect human beings that there's no obstacle hindering the soul from living after death with the existence of its intellectual element. This state in the world to come, we've made clear. Right? That's what he focuses on, not the resurrection of the dead time Messiah. And he says, let no one blame me for the freedom which I have used certain expressions and assertions in this treatise of mine, which may provoke criticism of the learned. I've spoke freely. Okay. And then, as we mentioned before, the last principle of the 13 principles, right? He speaks a lot about each principle, but when he gets to the last one, the resurrection of the dead, he says, we've already explained this. That's it, right? He did say you have to believe it, but he does seem to, very unclear, he doesn't seem to put a lot of emphasis on it. Certainly seems to believe that that reward is not at the time of the Messiah or the resurrection of the dead, but after one dies and the soul is perpetuated onward. Okay, there's a lot of resources about this epistle. As I mentioned, this epistle is sort of more important. Is more there's more argument about this one than the other ones. Because this one, the question is, what does the Rambam really believe? There's many articles. There's questions about whether it was a forgery. There's original translations. We have whole books written. For instance, Meir Abulafia, who was a rabbi just a few hundred years after the Rambam, he writes a book against the Rambam, basically accusing the Rambam of not believing in the resurrection of the dead, and which perhaps is why he wrote the treatise on the resurrection. I'll send you, there is a translation that was done by Fred Rosner, and I think I can probably access that online and send it to you. That's probably going to be the most detailed. Okay, so that's what we'll do. So now we've sort of done the background. Now we'll do his actual letter and see what we think of it. Do we think that it agrees with the other things that he said? Do we think that what's his true belief? That's the question. And the Rambam does say that people contradict themselves when they want to hide things, contradict themselves when they want to say something to one crowd and not another. But the Rambam in his introduction to the Perplexed talks about why authors write with contradictions. Is this a contradiction? Is it just that he was getting criticism? You have to clarify it. What does he really believe? That'll be sort of the goal. Okay. So we'll do that tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yeah.